Welcome to our training video on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Public Art Grants for fiscal year 2025, which runs from July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025.
I'm Carolyn Koska, the Grants Administrator for Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. During this training, you'll learn about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, the guidelines for this grant program, the resources that are available for you on our website, how to use our online grant system, the application questions you'll need to answer, and the grant process, or what happens after you submit your application. Check out the chapters below if you want to go directly to a particular topic. For now, we'll start out talking briefly about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council.
Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor, create, and promote the arts in their communities. Here is our region down in the southwest corner of the state. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota, working to get state arts funding out into all corners. So most of our funding does come from the state of Minnesota, with an allocation from the State General Fund, but the majority from the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. We also receive funding from the McKnight Foundation, which we use for our artist grants, and from memberships and donations from around our region. To be a little more specific about our region, applicant organizations need to be located within that region, which includes 18 counties: Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lac-qui-Parle, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock, Swift, and Yellow Medicine, and also 2 tribal nations: Pajutazizi, Upper Sioux Community, and Chanshayapi, Lower Sioux Community. We acknowledge that the SMOC region occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. Public art grants are open to 501c3 nonprofit organizations and units of government, which would be city, county, or tribal government. If your organization has been operating in the spirit of a nonprofit but doesn't have its 501c3 status yet, you can apply with a fiscal sponsor organization. So you'd need to find an organization in your community that does meet the organization eligibility, and they would receive and manage your grant funds for you and ultimately have the responsibility for the project. For your application, you'll need to include an agreement with your fiscal sponsor organization that spells out how that financial relationship is going to work, and someone from the fiscal sponsor organization will also need to sign your application. Through the Public Art Grant Program, we want to support large-scale physical public art projects that will leave an arts legacy in our region. So we're looking for arts access for the community through this project, along with a continuing impact for more than just a year, for instance. The kinds of projects this can fund include murals, sculptures, or other physical public art you might think of to put in your community. And as you're working on planning for this project, you may also want to apply for a Quick Support for Organizations grant. One of the project types under that grant can provide planning funding for a specific public art project that you're working on and help you get everything together that you'll need to apply for that public art grant. So with the Quick Support Planning Grant, you could do things like get community input, run your request for proposals process to find your artist, who you will need to have figured out when you are applying for your public art grant. You can also use it to figure out what your costs are going to be, what kind of resources you might have, and also to research things related to feasibility or sustainability around the project. For instance, you might need to get a wall of a building inspected to see if it's appropriate to have a mural put there. As far as grant amounts, the public art grant is available for up to $20,000, and you are required to contribute a 20% cash match toward the project. As an example, if your project is actually going to cost $20,000, you could request $16,000, and then you'd need to source the remaining $4,000 from your organization or the community. The Quick Support for Organizations grant is available for up to $2,500, and no matching funds are required for that. We do have a funding limit per organization per year, and that limit is $20,000, so that is something to be aware of with this grant. If you are requesting the full $20,000, that would be the only grant you could request from us in that fiscal year. If you are ending up doing both the Quick Support and public art grants within the same fiscal year, you might have to decrease the amount you're requesting for the public art grant. But also be aware that this limit of $20,000 does not include operating support funds that you may already be receiving from SMOC. A few eligibility items to be aware of. The following are not eligible for these grants: any regular programming or recurring projects that your organization does, requests for new building construction, purchase of real estate, anything going toward endowment funds. Also not eligible are projects that don't have an art focus. Other ineligible activities include anything related to a for-profit project, organization, or business, educational projects within a school system. Schools should apply under our Arts in the Schools program. Activities that aren't open to the public. Activities that take place outside of Minnesota, since we are using state funds for these grants. Also ineligible would be the religious socialization of the participants or audience. Fundraising events. These grants are meant to help your project break even, not to make a profit. So there should not be any fundraising either for your organization or another organization as part of the project. And if you are receiving SMOC operating support, you can't include prorated operating type costs in this budget. A few more ineligible things: payments of debts that are incurred before the grant begins, grant funds being used to match another SMOC grant. If you have received a direct Minnesota legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund for fiscal year 2025, you are not eligible. And if you have a past due final report that is still outstanding. So this is an overview of some of the eligibility things to be aware of, but make sure that you take a look at the full list in the guidelines. As far as deadlines, public art has one deadline this year on December 11th, and the earliest date you could start anything toward your project would be February 1st of 2025. And then for the Quick Support for Organizations grant, deadlines are the first of the month, August through May, and the earliest project start date would be the first day of the following month. So if you applied by August 1st, you could start your project September 1st. For both of these programs, you'll need to submit your application by 4 p.m. on the deadline day. The system will not allow you to submit after that time. And note that this is a change from previous years when the deadline used to be 4:30 p.m. You'll need to choose a start date for your project. And in doing that, you'll first want to check for the earliest allowed start date for the round you're applying for. You can't start any project activities before that start date, and this would include things like ordering any supplies, holding auditions, doing any advertising, and you can't expend any funds before that start date. If there is something that you would need to pay for before that date, for instance, if you had to put down a deposit on something early, then you could not include that cost in your project budget. You'll also need to choose a project end date. You'll want to give yourself plenty of time to complete the project activities and then also evaluate the project. For instance, if you are purchasing some equipment, you'll want to allow not just for the purchase, but also for some time to use the equipment and get some feedback on that. Also be aware that projects awarded in fiscal year 25 need to be finished up by June 30th of 2026. So that is the latest end date that you could choose. Your project will also need 2 people connected with it. You'll need a project director, and this will be the person who is most directly responsible for the day-to-day activities of the project. And then you'll need an authorizing official, and that is someone who has authorizing power for your organization, like your president or treasurer. These do need to be 2 separate people, and both will need to sign all of your grant documents, including the application. Now we'll go over to our website to look at what resources are available for you there. Here we are on our website, and everything that you need will be under this Grants tab, including login right here to the grant system. We'll come back to that in a little bit. And then we've got information for all of the grants we have available. And we'll go to our grants for organizations. And here are the public art grants. So on this page for public art grants, you'll find first the guidelines for the program. And as we mentioned before, it's important to take a look at this document to make sure that you're not missing anything related to eligibility. So make sure to read through that. The Apply Now button will take you to our grant system. Then we have the important dates related to this grant program, including the deadline, earliest project start date, and when some of those other parts of the process will happen. Here we have the training video for this grant program. Right now this is last year's, but fiscal year 25's video will be here shortly. We also have a link to all of the grant workshops that will be available for you this year. Then at the bottom of the page, we've got some helpful materials for you. Here are those guidelines again. We have the application questions in a Word document. Sometimes people like to work in that first and then paste things into the grant system later. We have scoring criteria so you can get an idea of that. And we also have the final report questions available as well in case you'd like to know what you're getting into with that. And now we'll go take a look at our workshops and assistance page. Our workshops and assistance page outlines all of the ways that you can get help with your application. We have grant support open office hours on the second Tuesday of each month. You can stop by our office in Marshall from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. While you're there, you can talk through project ideas, sit and work on your application with staff there to answer any questions. Maybe you need some help preparing your work samples or working on a final report, but you can just stop in and get the help that you need. We also have some grants Q&A sessions. There are a series of those in person, so look to see if we are coming somewhere near you. And these will be updated as we have specific dates scheduled. We also have virtual sessions available. You can register for those here. And for both of these, you can learn a little bit about all of the grant programs that are available and then have time to ask questions about your specific project and get those answered. This year we also have a couple of workshops on some specific grant writing topics. First on reaching underserved and underrepresented communities, and then on grant goals and evaluation, so you can check those out. You can easily schedule some time to meet with me. You can just click this link and choose a time on my calendar, and we can meet by phone, by Zoom, or in person at our office in Marshall. And then here are videos of our past workshops that we've had as we are recording our videos for our fiscal year 25 grants. Those will also appear here. There's one more page with resources for you, and that is our credits and resources page. So we've got links to grant credit lines and logos that you may need to be using for your marketing. Then we've got a sample contract so you can see what that looks like ahead of time. If your organization is using a fiscal sponsor, there's a sample agreement available here. If you're doing a project where you need a cooperative agreement with your facility owner, there's a sample agreement here for that. And then we've also got some accessibility resources here for you. And now we'll head over to our grant system. That brings us to our login page. You can enter your email address and password here if you already have an account in the system. If you are totally new, you can click Create New Account. If you're not sure whether you or someone from your organization already has an account in the system, you can contact us and we can get that figured out for you. But for right now, we are going to log in. And as we first come into the system, a reminder, if you have also worked as a grant reviewer or panelist, for us to remember to switch your role to applicant. And here we are on our applicant dashboard. So this is where you will come when you log in to the grant system. Unless you are coming in for the first time, then you will be brought straight to this apply page. The apply page lists all of the grants that are currently available. So you'll want to just scroll down and find the one you're looking for. Here's public art. There's this preview button if you'd like to just take a look at the application without actually starting anything, but we're going to go ahead and hit apply. I'll point out a few helpful buttons at the top. If you need to work in another language, we have Google Translate embedded into the site, and you can choose what language you'd like to work in, and it will translate the interface and all of the application questions for you. We have the Copy Previous Answers button. If you have done something in the system before, this will bring up a list of all of the previous applications you've worked on, and you can choose one of those and it will copy over any answers to questions that are the same between both applications. So that can give you a bit of a head start. And then we have the Collaborate button, which allows you to invite someone else to work on the application with you. You would enter their email address here, choose what level of permission you want to give them, and then enter a message explaining whatever it is you'd like them to do, whether you want them to just proof something or add some information to the application or have them come in and sign the application. So you would just invite them, they'll get an email, and then they'll just need to create a password in order to get into the system and work on the application with you. You'll need a name for your project, and there are some examples here, and then you'll enter the amount you are requesting, though you'll probably want to wait until you have filled out your budget form to enter this amount. We've got some of those helpful documents here again, and some tips as you're working on your application. You'll notice that the character limit for most of the fields is pretty big. We want to make sure you have plenty of space, but don't feel like you need to fill that all up if you have already answered the question fully. So you'll start out describing your project. It does let you know there are places to provide more detail about a few things later on in the application, but you'd start out here describing the basics of what you are wanting to do. Enter your start date and end date. Any public events that you have that are related to this project. And we will take that information and use that to post that on our area arts calendar. So make sure that all of the specifics are there. Next, you'll talk about the artists that are involved in your project. What kind of artistic vision is behind this project? Which artists have you chosen? And a little information about them. And how did you decide on that artist and project? You can attach your artist resumes here, and then you'll want to include samples of work from those artists. And there are some links here if you need some help in resizing or combining images or files. New this year, we have some guidelines around social media samples, because not everyone who will be reviewing your application may have access to things like Facebook or Instagram. We ask that you don't provide social media links as your only work samples. If you do need to provide those links, we ask that you include a few screenshots from them so that people can for sure see what those are showing. So you've got a few fields where you can upload some samples as well as include some links. And we ask that in these text boxes you describe what it is that you're attaching. In addition to just general samples of the artist's work, it's a good idea to include some sort of mock-up of what this planned project is going to look like. Next, we ask about what you are doing to reach the underserved or underrepresented in your community through this project. So first, we want you to take a look at your community and describe some groups that you might consider underserved or underrepresented by your organization. And in thinking about that, you might look at race or ethnicity, language, socioeconomic level, gender, ability, etc. If you're wanting to learn more about your community in order to think about this, the Minnesota Compass site is helpful. You would look for your community. Here's one we'll use as an example. And it's got a bunch of data for you. You could look at things like age, race or ethnicity. And I'll point out that where it says suppressed, there's nothing wrong there. It just means it's a quite small number, or there's a larger margin of error around that particular data. You can also look at things like disability, and then it even goes into housing, transportation. So you can get a little more idea of what groups in your community might be underserved. So you would list those here, and then in the second part, we ask you to choose at least one of those groups and explain some specific ways that you're going to reach out to or involve that group so they can participate in your project. So a great one for this type of project would be including members of that group in your planning to find out what they want or need as part of this. Maybe you're translating some marketing materials, providing transportation or childcare. There are some other examples for you there. We also realize that your organization might already be made up of and mainly serving members of the group that you're focusing on, and if so, you can explain that. And then finally, how will the project be accessible to those with various disabilities? And if you have an ADA access plan, how does that inform your planning for this project? Next, you'll look at impact of the project. We ask you to talk about why this project is important, if it meets particular artistic needs of the community. Then what impact are you expecting this project will have in the present? So during the grant period, what changes might take place to people's artistic skills, knowledge, attitude, or behaviors as a result of this public art? And then how do you plan to measure or prove that those changes have taken place? So you'll want some way that you're gathering results or feedback, and then what kind of responses that you're getting might indicate that this was successful. Then we ask you to also talk about how might this provide sustainable arts access in the next 5 years. So how might the physical artwork be maintained? Do you have any plans to revisit this project in future activities? And for this part, you're not expected to have any measurements or feedback during the grant period. And there is a place where you can attach the evaluation tool or survey that you might be using if you have one. Then we're asking for some estimated number of artists and audience members involved. Next, we ask if there are any non-artist personnel that will have a large role. Maybe you have someone who is heading up the search committee for the artist or just overseeing the project in general, who is not one of the artists that you listed already above. If you have a person like this, you can provide information about them here, but it's possible that you might not have anyone else, and it's okay to just say that. We ask for a little info about your planning schedule and your publicity plan for the project. Also, what kind of community support do you have for the project, whether that is financially or through other kinds of collaborations with community groups. Then we need to see your budget. And we do have an Excel form here that you can use, though you can create your own if you'd like, but we'll look at the Excel form. If you are able to use this Excel form, it does do some helpful calculations for you. So as you start, you could put your organization name or title of your project up here, and then you just begin entering various costs that you'll have for the project. And then we will put some numbers in here for those. And you'll see that it's adding up for us. And then you are required to have that 20% cash match. So it tells us, based on our total here, the minimum amount that your organization or community is going to need to put toward the project. So let's say these are just some donations we have gotten from the community. And then this tells us our request can't exceed $12,400, which was 80% of our cash cost, or $20,000, whichever is less. In this case, our $12,400 is less. So that's how much we can request, and our profit equals 0, which is what we need. If, for instance, you didn't have enough in your match, this would say your profit is minus a certain amount, and you'd need to adjust that. But let's say our project is more expensive. All right, so now we've got our total cost of $30,500. And our match needs to be at least $6,100. But now it tells us our request can't exceed $24,400 or $20,000, whichever is less. So in this case, $20,000 is less, which is the maximum amount that you can request. And then it tells us down at the profit, we have our minus $4,400. So we'll need to come up with that additional amount in income. So we'll say we found some more donations for that. And in this instance, the cash match needs to be more than the minimum 20%, but now our profit equals 0. So you would save this, and then you can upload it here into your budget. We also ask, as you're putting that together, if you have applied for or received a Minnesota State Arts Board grant for this project. And if so, we ask you to explain that and include that funding in the income section of your budget. We also have the budget narrative field. If there are some details that really didn't fit into that spreadsheet, you can describe those here. Then our next section is about your organization. We ask for your mission statement, brief history, types of programs, who you generally serve, information about how your board operates, along with the names and qualifications of the board members. And you can either enter board members here also into this text box, or you can upload a board list here. Then we're just collecting some data, which doesn't really have any bearing on your application, just some things that we need to pass along to the state. So we ask about what was your most recently completed fiscal year. Then you'll choose your organization type. If you are an arts organization, you're asked to enter your total expenses for that year. If you are instead a non-arts organization, you're asked to enter your expenses for the arts from that year. Then some demographic information about your organization leadership and the people that you serve, the total audience that you had in that year that you chose above. Then we'd like to know which types of assistance you might have taken advantage of in working on your application. And then finally, just some contact information. So here's where you will enter your project director, your authorizing official. We ask who the grant writer is in case we have some questions. And then you'll choose whether you are using a fiscal sponsor or not. If yes, a fiscal sponsor section will show up where you can enter their information, and this is where you'll attach that agreement that you have with them. But if you are not working with a fiscal sponsor, that won't show up for you at all. Then we've got signatures, and this is a great place to use that collaborate button up at the top if you need to invite, say, your authorizing official in here to sign, or someone from your fiscal sponsor organization. Finally, this year we are participating in a statewide survey of all of the regional arts councils about our application process. So we ask you to just answer quickly a few survey questions about that. And this also does not have any bearing on your application. The reviewers will not see any of this information. This will all be confidential. So as you get to the bottom here, you'll see there's a submit application button for when you're ready to do that. There's also the save application button. Things will be auto-saving for you as you're working, but if you click the save application button, it will give you a list of the required questions that you still need to answer, which, since we haven't done anything, they're all here, but this can kind of help you track your progress. And if you want to keep working, you can just hit continue. But we're going to go back to our dashboard. And here you'll see here's the application that we just started. And if you want to go back and keep working, there's the link to edit application. And then this is the same place you'll come back to if you're awarded a grant to find your contract and your report. And now we'll head back to our slides. Now we have some tips for you as you're working on your application. First, make sure to think ahead to choose the best timing for your application. So check out the deadlines and start dates and see what makes the most sense for the timing of your project. Then read the guidelines and criteria carefully. As we mentioned before, we went through most things, but there are probably a few things that are in that written guidelines that we may not have covered. So make sure to take a look at that so that you're not surprised by anything. It's also good to start working on your application early. If you are needing to gather information from other people, if you might have some questions you need time to get answered, just make sure to give yourself plenty of time. Also, in the application, you have noticed that a lot of the questions had multiple parts to them. So make sure you are addressing all of those and really answering those fully, that you're not missing any of those pieces. Also, as you're writing, you'll want to keep your answers real clear and concise. As we mentioned before, no need to try and fill up the text boxes if you feel like you fully answered the question. And also no need for any fancy grant language you might think you need. Just using everyday language is fine, as if you're telling a friend about the project. Another suggestion is to not assume that grant reviewers know anything about you or your project. We have reviewers coming from all around the region, so they may not have heard of your organization or be familiar with you as an artist. So be careful about including acronyms without spelling those out, talking about certain programs without explaining. Just assume as you're writing that the person reading doesn't know anything about what you're doing. And finally, we are here to help, so don't hesitate to contact us with any questions. There are multiple ways to get assistance with your application. You can certainly contact us to talk through your project before you're getting started. Make sure you're under the right grant program. Make sure elements of your project are eligible. You can also get answers to questions about the application as you're working on your project. And finally, we can do a review of your application draft before you submit it. If you let us know up to about 2 weeks before the deadline, we can guarantee that we're able to look through your application, give you some feedback, let you know if you're missing anything, if anything might sound confusing to the reviewers. This does not guarantee funding of your project, but we are able to give you some feedback. So another great reason to start working on your application early in order to have time for that part of the process. So what happens after you submit your application? The first thing is that SMOC staff will review it for eligibility and completeness. And if at that stage we find that something is missing or there's an eligibility concern, you'll have 48 hours to fix whatever that is. And then at that point, the group of applications from the round will go on to a panel of individuals from around our region who will discuss and score the applications based on the criteria for the program, which we'll look at in a minute. And then finally, their recommendations go to our board of directors who make the final funding decisions. And that most often just involves taking the applications in ranked order of score and taking the funding down the list as far as the budget goes. The scoring criteria for the Public Art Grant Program include the artistic quality and merit of the project, worth 46% of your score, reaching the underserved and underrepresented in your community, worth 13% of the score, the impact this will have on participants and audience, worth 28% of your score, and your ability to accomplish the project, worth 13% of your score. In more detail, for artistic quality and merit, the reviewers will be looking to see if activities have high artistic merit and potential for participants to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts, if the artists have an appropriate level of experience, and if the artist's work shows technical skill and artistic vision or voice. For reaching the underserved or underrepresented, they will be looking to see if you're able to identify underserved and underrepresented groups in your community, if you have a specific plan to reach out and involve at least one of those groups in the project, and if you are making some efforts toward ADA accessibility. For impact, they will be looking to see the importance of the project to the community, if it meets artistic needs, if it shows growth for your organization or community. They will look for evidence of sustainable arts access and a plan for physical maintenance for the project going forward. They'll also look to see if you have identified proposed changes to take place as a result of the project and a plan to measure whether those changes have taken place. Finally, for ability to accomplish the project, the reviewers will look to see if you have an appropriate timeline, budget, and marketing plan. If you have community support for your project, they'll look at your organization, board, and other non-artist personnel involved. And finally, if you have received previous grants from SMOC, if those have been successfully completed. After the panel has completed its scoring, you may also be able to be awarded some additional points if you meet some of the following criteria related to SMOC funding priorities. So if you are a first-time applicant to SMOC, if your organization is led by or primarily serving BIPOC or LGBTQ communities or people with disabilities, or if you are from a county that hasn't received as much funding from us recently. So you could be awarded up to 3 additional percentage points for each of these criteria, for a maximum of 9 additional percentage points added to your score. If your grant is awarded, you'll need to complete a contract, and we saw where those would be located in the grant system a little bit ago. And then payment of your full grant award will be sent to you after the contract is received, and you'll have an option to receive that electronically or by check. You'll need to acknowledge your grant on any publicity or marketing materials that you have. You'll need to include the credit line that can be found in your grant contract, and you might also need to include this Minnesota Legacy logo depending on the source of your funds. But all of these credit materials and logo files, etc., will be sent to you, so you won't have to worry about which options you need to include. And we also looked at the credits and materials page on our website, where some of that information is available also. We understand that things happen as you're working on your project. So if it's looking like you may need to make some changes to your original plan while your project is in progress, contact us and we may be able to help with things like extending your project end date, approving some changes to your budget. So no worries if things change, but just make sure to contact us and get those changes approved. You'll be receiving a reminder partway through your project, checking in to see if anything has changed and what kind of changes might require a project change request to SMOC. You'll have a final report due 60 days after the project end date that you have chosen. So once you start your project, it's a good idea to go into that report and check what information you'll need to be gathering. There are some audience demographics questions, for instance. So make sure to look ahead what kind of information you'll need to be gathering during your project. And that's the last of the information that I need to share with you today.